What is up, everybody? Hey, did you get enough painting fire last week by chance? No? Great, because today is Quick Tip 19, and I didn't leave you traditional brush artists out. I know not everybody has an airbrush, so you guessed it. Quick Tip 19 is on how to paint fire using the good old analog traditional paintbrush. So, again, like last week, not much to kind of preface to this. I'll let the tutorial speak for itself. But if this is your first quick tip with me on my channel, these are recorded over a year and a half ago, and they're exclusive on my Patreon for that time period until today when I release it to the public. So if you're interested in checking out more of these quick tips, I have an archive of, I was at 95 as of today, March 1st of 2022. I release a brand new one every week on Patreon. And again, it lives there in exclusivity for about a year before I release them to the public. So if you're interested in checking out my Patreon, there will be a link down below. Go figure. That's like the YouTube thing, right? Links down below. Also, you can check out my live show, my Twitch show, and all kinds of other cool stuff. I'll leave all those links down below. So without further ado, enjoy the video. I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching. Click that subscribe. See ya. All right, guys, quick tip number 19. We're going to start off. This is traditional brush painted fire. I've again based the model in a very warm yellow, like an Everland sunset. In this case, I used P3's Heart Fire. And I'm going to start in by kind of working in some layers here of a really bright yellow. This is golden yellow from Pro Acryl. You can use Flash Gets from G-Dub. Any bright, pure yellow will work. Now I'm going to speed it up here a little bit. The point is, I want to get a nice even layer of this bright yellow. Yellow is notoriously difficult to work with, especially via brush here. I've thinned the paint very slightly, and I'm just going around trying to get a decent layer, consistent layer of this yellow over the kind of bright orangish yellow, if you will, of the mid-tone of the fire. Now, if you didn't watch my airbrush workup video, please understand that fire is the hottest at its center. Where it's the hottest, it is going to be the brightest. So therefore, in the middle of this flame, we're going to work to the brighter tones. And then as we go out, it's going to get cooler and the temperature is going to get darker. I should say the color is going to get darker. So I actually made a mistake, and notice I highlighted all these ridges with that yellow. It's quite the opposite here. Fire is a very unique situation where we're not highlighting, we're actually adding darker color as we go up those ridges of the flame. So I realized my dumb mistake here, and I'm coming back kind of working in some of this orange yellow mid-tone of Heartfire or Everland Sunset would be a good G-Dub equivalent. If you're using Pro Acryl, you can mix yellow ochre and golden yellow. You can even throw in a dash of burnt orange to get it a little bit more of that orange effect. And again, I speed it up here. The point is, consider the ridges. The fire here has a lot of ridges and valleys. Valleys being the deep kind of indentations of the fire, and the ridges or peaks being just that, the raised edges of the sculpt. So picture those ridges, those raised kind of edges of the fire, if you will, as almost like a radiator fan or a radiator coil. Those, or for those of you who are computer people, the heat sinks, kind of like the metal wings or flaps or whatever. Those protrusions, those ridges are going to dissipate heat, right? So we're actually going to use the color before, the warmest color, transitioning into the next coldest color as the recess color. This is quite opposite. This is where it gets really confusing for people. Fire is an opposite workup, where on any other miniature where we're trying to depict shadow, we're actually depicting brighter tones towards those deep recesses, the valleys. So I'm going back over what I just worked up, and there's going to be a lot of that back and forth through this whole tutorial, you'll notice. And I'm just re-hitting some of those ridges that I accidentally did in bright yellow. I slow it down here so you guys can kind of catch up with me. Excuse me. So now, of course, we're going into our natural orange here throughout this whole workup. If I'm doing it via brush, not airbrush, I'm using pure opaque paints. I'm not using transparents here. And I'm just going to go ahead and base coat. Sorry about that, guys. I'm going to base coat all the way out to the final edge, because from here on out, I want those undertones to be in those deep valleys, just like I did with the yellows. So I'm kind of picking out all of this radius around the outside of the flames, if you will, just giving it a good base coat. And I slow it down here to show you how I pick out some of these ridges and whatnot. But I'm basically going to throw down a thin down layer here, make sure everything's nice and smooth. Then I'm going to come back with glazes, and I'm going to work between the previous color and this new color, orange, and kind of go back and forth between the valleys and the ridges so I get a smooth transition here. So right now I'm working with a little bit thinner of a paint. I'm not quite glazing here, guys. I am thinning my paint considerably, but it is not a glaze. I'm not dabbing it off on a wet paper towel or anything. This is just simply a really thin down paint. It is still going to give you a decent layer. So I kind of just glaze up, and I'm always glazing out towards the edges of the flame because I want the most intense and bright orange towards the outer edges of the flame to transition into the next color, which will be red. So after a little back and forth between the Everland Sunset Heartfire color and the orange here, you see that things are kind of getting a little more smooth. Now I'm picking out a little bit more of a finite tone going back into the zone of the Everland Sunset or Heartfire color, if you will, because again, I want those ridges that are in that yellow zone to start showing a colder tone, which in this case will be represented by colors getting closer to red. I cannot stress that enough. You need to be able to kind of invade the other territories of the warmer tone colors with the colder colors, if you will. And you'll notice that I'm not showing this literally time for time here, but you'll notice between cuts that they get smoother. See how smooth that is? But those orange peaks are getting into that Everland Sunset. And apparently I need to adjust my cam because it shakes a lot. So bear with me. Sorry about that, gang. I must have missed that in editing. So you see those ridges are really orange into that mid-tone yellow. Now we're going to bring in the reds towards the peaks of each of these flames, all the way on the outside of this entire flame. And red is going to represent a very cold portion of the flame. Again, much like the orange, I have a thin down red, but I'm just blocking in major areas here. I'm not going all the way into the orange zone and highlighting ridges yet, because I'm going to get into that with the glazing, start building up a transition. The name of the game with fire, I don't care who you listen to on any other painting, but when it comes to fire, fire is smooth, okay? There is no layering in fire. It has to have a decently smooth transition. So now I fast forward, I've done a little bit of glazing, and I wanted to slow it down here just to show you this is still very much just red. I haven't gone in and used any orange because there is this play between once you get all of your tones basically blocked in and start glazing in to smooth out that hard line of red between orange. Once that's all done, then you're going to go back to orange and start glazing back and forth between red and orange to smooth out those valleys and peaks to have a cleaner transition. And you'll see right now that's before I've gone back into those valleys where I just filled that valley with red here. I'm still going to come back with orange and soften that out in the in between, I guess you would say. So as I glaze, I'm also again pulling up towards the brightest, most color saturated portion of red as I go. Now notice there's not nearly as much red as there is orange. As you go out, that color zone is going to kind of feather out, if you will. I just wanted to take a second to show you this part because it does get blended in, but I also come along and glaze up those ridges, and I'm pulling that paint. Notice I'm starting in the valley and pulling it up towards the peak of the ridge because I want that pure red to be at the very pinnacle of that ridge. Then I'll come back with orange and kind of soften out the valley and blend the two together. So as I work up all these ridges, notice the changes when I come back to it here in a second. I'm going to hit some of these ridges, but see that valley in the middle? That'll change. So see how soft it is? Now we're going to jump into some black. And this is not bold pirate red. That was the last color. This is coal black. It's also 1:30 in the morning, guys, so I apologize. But again, same situation here. Nothing different. Black blocking in. And notice I'm only hitting some of these really fine tips, right? I'm not necessarily going around to the very bottom sides of it, but this is something that you're not going to see in real live fire unless it's like daytime and you're burning something that's very non-environmental friendly, like maybe styrofoam or plastic bags or something. You'll see that kind of black wisp of smoke and the flame tip will be black. But this is more or less to represent that the flame has cooled off at the very tips, okay? So I blocked it in, and now I'm working with a very, very thin glaze of black here. And I stress to you guys, take your time with this because it's very easy to overdo the black. I think that's probably one of the biggest, I guess, violations, if we're going to call it that, of painting fire, is overdoing the black. And over red, black is going to be like very prominent. So take your time. Notice that it's sloppy. It's not pretty, right? It's okay. I'm going to come back in and I'm going to glaze those valleys with red again. So just take your time, build up those ridges, and you see I'm pulling all of that pigment again towards the pinnacle of that peak, the very top. And don't be afraid to kind of dab in a little bit of dirtiness here or there to kind of influence once you come back and glaze over it with red. That little tonal shift, that little desaturation under the red will kind of add a little bit of character. So here we go. I've glazed in all of that red and kind of fixed those valleys. Now we need to show the brightest spot in the flame right at the center. We don't use white for that. Fire's not white. Well, it can be, but in this case, we're sticking with yellow. So I'm going with pale yellow. You can use Vallejo ice yellow. I've thinned this down considerably. I'm going to call this a very much thinned down glaze, dirty paint water, if you will. There's hardly any pigmentation within my medium. And I'm taking it, I'm doing kind of a broad glaze for this round right now, keeping to only these really centralized valleys and just kind of dumping the pigment in there. And then once it dries, it's really going to soften back. And I'm sorry about the camera angle, but it got away from me here. I just want to make sure that you guys understand that we're basically going to be shading in or glazing in about 80% of the valley surface in these little areas. It will very much soften up and basically kind of wipe out itself as it dries. And here you'll see it's really faded out, right? So now I'm using the very tip of my brush, and again, I'm sorry about the camera angle. I thought I was on screen, but I apparently am not. But use the tip of your brush to kind of trace the very deepest, say 30% of the valleys in these white spots now to just kind of intensify it. And it appears white, but it's still got that yellow influence, and with the yellow underneath it, it's just going to push it that much further into yellow. But the idea here and throughout the whole tutorial is that we're picking out more detail than we were able to pick out with the airbrush here. Every little valley and peak will combo off of each other. I'd say 80% of this model, maybe even 90, I'm going to be bold and say that 90% of this model, where there's a peak, the valley is not the same color as the peak, okay? That contrast is really going to sell the depth and undulation of the flame and the different temperatures of where the fuel source is. Imagine this is a campfire, right? And the fuel source is the logs or whatever you put in there, the bodies of your vanquished foes, whatever is burning. That's where that really bright, almost white yellow flame is going to be. And as that flame gets taller, it's going to cool off. It's not going to be as hot, so it turns red and black and whatnot. So there it is. I mean, this thing, it's not a quick process. I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys that this took me 15 minutes to paint. This probably took me about an hour to paint this. Now, this is a rather big model, so a smaller wisp of flame, a spell, whatever, in somebody's hand might take you a little less time. But I also wanted to show it next to the airbrush version so you guys can really appreciate the difference in the quality, the time, and the skill it takes to really work this fire up. And then, of course, there's nothing wrong with the airbrush flame, but to me, the wow factor, the sell, is there in the traditional brush workup. So I really hope this helps you guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the Discord or on Patreon.